Rob and Mia were the kind of couple everyone in town knew, or thought they knew. They'd built a reputation as a solid, dependable duo, both respected and well-liked. They were the picture of charm, often hosting local charity events that pulled in all the big names. Their lives seemed full of laughter and sophistication, and their social status only grew as they continued their charity work, bringing attention to causes that truly mattered. On the outside, they were the golden couple. But lately, Rob had noticed subtle shifts in Mia's behavior. She was usually warm and present, but now she seemed distracted, almost like she was somewhere else entirely when they were together. She used to prioritize family gatherings, yet recently she'd started making excuses, saying she was tied up with extra charity work or last-minute meetings. To anyone else, these explanations might have sounded reasonable. To Rob, though, they were flimsy, a bit too convenient. One evening, over a quiet dinner at home, Rob decided to bring it up. He'd prepared for this conversation, thinking through how he might word things without making it sound like he was interrogating her. "Mia," he started, keeping his tone casual, "you've been pretty busy lately. I hardly see you around." Mia barely looked up from her plate. "It's just been a lot of charity work. You know how it is. Sometimes it feels like it never stops." Rob tried to gauge her reaction, watching for any sign of discomfort. But she was as cool as ever, giving only the vaguest of details, a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her casual deflection, paired with her sudden uptick in absences, left Rob feeling unsettled. Something about the way she said charity work sounded off, almost rehearsed. As the evening went on, Rob found himself replaying their conversation, small clues collecting in his mind. Her once warm and dedicated nature had shifted, and he sensed a distance he couldn't quite put his finger on. The charity gala was one of the biggest events of the season, held at a grand estate just outside town. This was the kind of gathering where everyone in their social circle showed up: local politicians, influential business people, and the town's well-to-do. Rob and Mia had been to countless galas together over the years, always presenting a united front as the power couple everyone admired. Tonight, though, Rob felt a strange tension simmering just beneath the polished surface. Dressed to the nines, they mingled, smiling and chatting with friends and acquaintances. Rob watched Mia as she moved through the crowd, her laughter louder, her charm dialed up. He'd never seen her this lively with other people before. She had a certain spark about her tonight, a bit too animated, too eager to connect with everyone, especially a man across the room who seemed to be on the receiving end of most of her attention. The man was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with an air of confidence that Rob found irritating. Rob watched as Mia laughed at something this guy said, a laugh that was familiar but also different. It was deeper, more genuine than the polite laughter she gave to anyone else at the gala. Rob's jaw tightened as he observed her leaning a bit too close, her hand brushing against the man's arm as they talked. Curiosity took over as Rob excused himself from his own conversation, pretending he was just making his way through the crowd. He strolled around, angling to get a little closer. As he neared a secluded hallway, the sound of Mia's laughter drifted over. Peeking around the corner, he caught sight of her, standing too close to the man, her face animated and bright in a way he hadn't seen in years. He could hear snippets of their conversation, the flirtation in her tone as clear as day. She was talking to this man in a way that felt intimate, familiar. Rob's stomach twisted as he took it all in. There was something deeply unsettling about the ease with which she connected with this stranger. As the evening wound down, Rob's mind raced. He wanted to confront her right then and there, to drag her away from that man and demand answers. But he didn't have any proof, just a gut feeling. So he held his tongue, hoping against hope that maybe he was misreading the signs, even as a cold dread settled over him. The next morning, Rob couldn't shake the nagging feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach. Mia's unusual behavior at the gala had done more than raise an eyebrow. It had lit a fire of suspicion in him that refused to go out. He replayed the scene in his mind, wondering what was really going on. Determined to dig deeper without tipping Mia off, Rob began a quiet investigation. He started with her calendar, scrolling through the entries she'd carelessly left open on their shared laptop. That's when he noticed it, an unfamiliar name on her schedule, a place she claimed to be volunteering for as part of her charity work. The company wasn't one he'd heard her talk about before, and he knew she hadn't mentioned any new projects recently. His mind racing, Rob dug up the company's address and decided to pay an unannounced visit. It wasn't far, just a few blocks away in a sleek, modern building that looked more like the headquarters of a major corporation than any nonprofit. Rob told himself he was simply being thorough, that maybe there was an innocent explanation he hadn't considered. Walking into the building, he felt an uncomfortable mix of anger and anticipation. He approached the receptionist with a calm smile, asking if Mia was in. The receptionist gave him a polite, confused look, explaining that she'd never heard of Mia and that no one by that name worked or volunteered there. Undeterred, Rob began asking around, mentioning the name of the owner he'd seen listed on the company's website. That's when he hit a nerve. One of the employees mentioned that Mia spent a lot of time in the owner's office, sometimes for hours at a time. It was rumored that he was quite the charmer, known for his way with women and his questionable business practices. The way the employee smirked when talking about the owner's private meetings made Rob's blood boil. The tension in Rob's body grew as he walked through the hallways, feeling like a man on a mission. He was nearly ready to confront her, but he wanted to see things with his own eyes first. After some waiting, he finally spotted them, Mia and the man, standing close together, deep in conversation in a small office at the back. The sight of her looking at another man the way she once looked at him was like a knife to his chest. Rob returned home that night, his mind simmering with anger and a growing resolve. Mia's betrayal was clear as day now, but he wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing he'd caught on just yet. He'd let her dig her own grave first, and he'd make sure she felt the sting of her choices as publicly as possible. The next morning, Rob took a calculated risk. He placed an anonymous call to a local newspaper, tipping them off about its potential scandal involving a local businessman and his supposed volunteer. He didn't mention Mia by name, but he gave just enough details to get their curiosity piqued. A well-respected woman involved with a known charmer at a company under the guise of charity work. It was just the sort of story the local press loved. It didn't take long for the news to spread. Within days, whispers of the scandal were everywhere. Rob watched the chaos unfold from a distance, maintaining his own spotless image while Mia's reputation began to unravel. The gossip spread across town like wildfire, with every juicy detail, every rumor exaggerated and dissected. Social media blew up with speculation, and the newspapers ran sensational headlines, eager to milk the story for all it was worth. Mia, usually the picture of poise, was visibly shaken. Rob could see her trying to play damage control, making desperate phone calls and nervously scrolling through her phone, no doubt seeing her own name dragged through the mud. The image she'd worked so hard to craft was collapsing around her, and Rob took a grim satisfaction in watching it all unfold. One evening, as they sat in silence over dinner, Mia finally broke. She looked across the table at him, her face pale and tense. "Rob," she began, her voice shaky, "have you heard what people are saying?" He met her gaze, his face blank, refusing to give her an inch. "Yeah, I've heard," he replied, his tone as cold as ice. Mia faltered, clearly searching for some reassurance, some sign that he'd still stand by her, despite everything. But Rob just continued eating, his silence saying more than words ever could. The story continued to spiral, Mia's affair laid bare for everyone to see. Her friends and acquaintances turned on her quickly, whispering about her behind her back, casting judgmental glances at her at every social event she attended. She was no longer the shining star of their community. Now, she was the subject of hushed gossip, her fall from grace a source of entertainment for those who had once admired her. As Rob watched the scandal unfold, he felt a sense of satisfaction he hadn't anticipated. The betrayal still stung, but seeing Mia face the consequences of her choices gave him a dark, twisted sense of closure. With the scandal now out in the open, Rob knew it was time to make his move. He'd waited patiently, watching Mia squirm as her once perfect image shattered, her social circle abandoning her one by one. The moment was ripe, and he intended to deliver the final blow. One evening, after a particularly tense day filled with calls from their lawyer and whispers around town, Rob approached Mia. She was sitting alone in the living room, her face drawn and pale, a shell of the confident woman she once was. Rob felt no sympathy. If anything, her vulnerability made him feel stronger, more certain of what he needed to do. "Let's stop pretending, Mia," he said, his voice firm. "I'm filing for divorce." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of anger and desperation. "Rob, please, this is all a misunderstanding. We can work through this." But he wasn't buying any of it. Her pleas fell on deaf ears, and he simply shook his head. "You made your choices, Mia. Now you get to live with the consequences. We're done." The words hit her like a slap, and she seemed to deflate right there in front of him. For the first time, Rob could see the full extent of the damage she'd caused herself. Her social standing had crumbled, her friends had deserted her, and now she was facing a divorce that would strip her of everything she held dear. Rob didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked out of the room, letting the silence linger between them like a final verdict. By the next day, he'd contacted a lawyer, set the divorce proceedings in motion, and began the process of reclaiming his life. As news of their impending divorce spread, Rob became the talk of the town. But instead of scandal, he received an outpouring of sympathy. People approached him with kind words, offering support and solidarity. He was now seen as the wronged husband, the man who'd endured a betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Meanwhile, Mia's fall was swift and brutal. Stripped of her social connections, she found herself isolated, her reputation in tatters. The once proud woman who had charmed her way into every room was now the subject of pity and ridicule. The life she'd built was crumbling, and all she could do was watch it collapse around her. For Rob, there was a sense of liberation in the aftermath. He no longer felt the weight of betrayal hanging over him. Instead, he found himself standing taller, finally free from the deceit and lies that had poisoned his life. He was ready to start fresh, to build something real this time, far away from the shadows of Mia's betrayal. With the divorce finalized, Rob felt a strange new energy coursing through him. The bitter sting of betrayal was still there, but it had transformed into something sharper, more focused, a desire to reclaim his life. He no longer had to tiptoe around the person who'd shattered his trust. He was free, and he was determined to rebuild on his own terms. As he settled into this new chapter, Rob took deliberate steps to reshape his life. He stayed busy, throwing himself into work and rekindling old friendships he'd let slip over the years. He found himself gravitating towards hobbies he'd long forgotten: fishing trips, motorcycle rides on open roads, late-night poker games with old buddies. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. One evening, a few months after the dust had settled, Rob attended a small gathering at a friend's house. It was a casual affair, far from the high society events he'd grown accustomed to with Mia. Here, there were no pretenses, just good company and laughter. Amid the chatter, he caught the eye of a woman across the room. She had an easy smile, a relaxed confidence that instantly set her apart. She introduced herself as Lisa, and they hit it off right away, talking effortlessly about everything from music to travel. Their connection felt natural, unforced. Lisa was warm, down to earth, and genuinely interested in what Rob had to say. Unlike Mia, who had always seemed to need an audience, Lisa was content to just be herself, without any hidden agendas or pretenses. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers, and Rob found himself looking forward to seeing her again. Over the next few weeks, they met up several times, slowly getting to know each other. It wasn't long before Rob felt a deep sense of relief. This was the kind of connection he'd been missing, something real and untainted by secrets. Lisa brought a sense of calm and honesty to his life, a welcome change after the storm he'd just weathered. But Rob's journey wasn't over yet. Mia's betrayal had left scars, and while he was moving forward, there was still an undercurrent of suspicion, a lingering distrust that bubbled up from time to time. He knew he'd have to work through it, piece by piece, if he was ever going to fully heal. As he grew closer to Lisa, Rob realized he needed to confront his own fears and insecurities, to let go of the anger that had sustained him through the divorce. The fresh start he dreamed of was within reach, but he knew it would require facing the ghosts of his past head-on. Rob's relationship with Lisa blossomed over the months, bringing a new sense of stability and warmth to his life. But no matter how steady things felt, a shadow remained, trailing behind him like a stubborn remnant of his past with Mia. Every now and then, flashes of Mia's betrayal would creep into his mind. A laugh here, a fleeting glance there, memories that cut deep. Rob knew that if he truly wanted to move forward, he had to confront these late one evening, unable to sleep, Rob found himself scrolling through old photos. Each image was a reminder of a time when he thought everything was fine, a time before he knew the truth. The faces, the places, the memories, all of it brought up a complicated mix of emotions. He lingered over a photo from their anniversary in Paris, a trip he'd planned meticulously, thinking it was the ultimate symbol of their strong bond. Now, it felt hollow, a painful reminder of how easy. The next morning, Rob decided it was time to close this chapter once and for all. He gathered every photo, every token of their life together, and packed them into a box. He didn't want them collecting dust in a closet or haunting him every time he opened a drawer. It was time to remove Mia's presence from his. In a final act of closure, he took the box to a secluded spot by the lake, a place he'd often gone to clear his mind. As he tossed each item into the water, he felt a strange calm washing over him. The photos, letters, and mementos drifted into the dark water, sinking and disappearing. It was like shedding an old skin, a quiet release of all the pain and betrayal that had clung to him. Later that night, as he sat across from Lisa, he felt lighter, more open than he had in years. She noticed it too, giving him a warm smile that needed no explanation. "You look different tonight," she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand. For the first time, Rob felt he could truly breathe again, the last vestiges of Mia's betrayal finally fading into the past. He could look forward, free from the weight of resentment, ready to embrace the future he was building with Lisa. And for once, he felt at peace, as though he'd taken the final step in reclaiming his life. Life with Lisa had brought Rob a peace he hadn't thought possible, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. One afternoon, Rob was running errands in town, picking up supplies for a weekend trip with Lisa. As he rounded a corner near a café, he froze. There, sitting by the window, was Mia. She looked different. The polished, confident woman he'd once known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed worn, almost defeated. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly, and her clothes, once so meticulously chosen, looked plain and subdued. She sat alone, staring into her coffee, looking as though the weight of the world had finally caught up with her. Part of Rob wanted to turn and walk away, to leave her to her misery and continue with his day. But another part, a deeper, more curious part, kept him rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the suddenness of seeing her, or perhaps it was the sense of unfinished business that still lingered. Whatever the reason, Rob found himself pushing open the cafe door and walking over to her table. Mia looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, a flicker of embarrassment flashing across her face. She seemed to shrink into her chair, as if she hoped he might just pass by. But Rob sat down across from her, meeting her gaze with an unflinching calm. They sat in silence for a few moments, the air thick with the weight of their shared history. Finally, Mia spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Rob replied, his tone steady but cold. She took a shaky breath, her eyes darting down to her cup. "I know you probably hate me, and I deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry, Rob, for everything." Her apology hung in the air, a frail attempt at reconciliation. Rob felt a strange sense of satisfaction, watching her struggle with her own guilt. But he didn't soften. This wasn't about forgiveness for him. He'd moved on, found a new life with Lisa, and he wasn't about to let Mia drag him back into the past. "Sorry doesn't change anything, Mia," he said, his voice unyielding. "You made your choices, and now you're living with them. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same." Mia nodded, her face a mixture of shame and regret. She looked like she wanted to say something more, but the words never came. Rob stood up, feeling a surge of finality wash over him. As he walked out of the cafe, he didn't look back. The encounter left him strangely unshaken. Seeing Mia so broken only confirmed what he'd known all along, that she was no longer a part of his life. Whatever they'd once shared was gone, buried beneath layers of deceit and betrayal. And as he walked away, Rob felt a renewed sense of freedom, as though he'd closed the door on the past for good. When he returned to Lisa later that day, he felt lighter, more certain than ever that he'd left his old life behind. This was his future, and he was ready to live it fully, without the shadows of Mia's betrayal hanging over him. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.